Welcome back everybody to linuxacademy.com. My name is Terry, and in today's course we continue our preparation for the Linux Foundation Certified System Administration exam. In our last video, we took a look at how to install and configure SSL so that we can generate a self-signed certificate for use with Apache. Now, a quick review in our HTTPD directory, and if you happen to be using a Debian or Ubuntu-based distribution, you'll find the same directory in Etsy Apache 2. We created a directory called SSL certs, and we ran a command that generated both a self-signed certificate from a key that we generated from an RSA 2048-bit key. So if we look at our SSL certificates directory, we see that we have both an Apache key that we then used to self-sign a certificate that we can install in Apache. Now, without getting into too much of the vhost configuration for our system, right now we have the default site that comes up under the IP address for our service. But at this point, we don't have Apache configured to listen for the 443 connection and serve up the certificate that we've created. So what we have to do is we have to create a vhost configuration for Apache, not only to listen on port 443, but to do something with it. So there's a couple of things that we need to do. We need to add a name virtual host and the port, in our case 443, to the virtual host configuration. And we can either add it to the httpd.configuration file. If you choose to enter your virtual host in HTTPD configuration, that's fine. But I tend to, not only for consistency with other distributions, but for ease of editing, and I like to keep the server configuration separate from the site configuration, so to speak. So I keep universal configuration items in the httpd.conf file in my conf directory, and then I keep things that are specific to my sites from within my vhost.d directory, which is why we configured it to import any configuration files in vhost.d. So let's take a look at what that might look like. So if we drop down a directory and we go to vhost.d, right now there's nothing in it. But I've created previously a configuration file that will allow us to browse a web browser to the Linux Academy lab server we're running on port 80 and 443 without you guys having to watch me type everything in. So let's do a copy of home user star.conf here, or root star.conf here. Okay, so the lab server that I'm using actually has a DNS entry for tcox2.mylabserver.com. One of the things that Linux Academy provides in its lab servers is it keeps DNS updated so that you can use your lab servers by name if you choose to. So we've got tcox2.mylabserver.com. Let's see what this looks like from a vhost perspective. Don't worry about all of the virtual host stuff. We're going to go over vhosts in detail in a subsequent video, but here's what we're going to focus on. We're focusing on the virtual host setup for port 443. So HTTPS is on port 443, and my web server will now listen on port 443. I have to turn the SSL engine on, and that assumes I've already installed mod SSL, which is the module for CentOS and Red Hat to enable SSL traffic for your web server. If you happen to be running Debian or Ubuntu, again, you would just do an A2 mod, which is available to enabled module for SSL. So we've got a server alias, a server name, so we're going to be accessing tcox2.mylabserver. We're turning the SSL engine on. We're indicating where we have the SSL certificate file, which in our case is Etsy httpd SSL certs and apache.crt. And then we have SSL certificate key file on Etsy httpd SSL certs apache key. Once we save that file And based on our configuration for HTTPD, so if we do a cat on the configuration for httpd.conf and we grep for vhost, what we'll see is we included the optional everything in vhost.d that ends in .conf. So be sure, because I've done this before where I configure everything correctly and I named my vhost configuration whatever.com and didn't append the .conf, the configuration was never picked up. So again, just something to keep in mind. So we're going to do, in this case, a systemctl, and we're going to do restart on HTTPD. If we had a configuration error in our vhost file as it was imported for the restart of the service, it would tell us and we could run a status to make sure we knew what our issue was. So now that it's been restarted, we can check a number of things. Telnet localhost on port 80 tells me I'm listening on port 80. Telnet localhost on 443 also tells me I happen to be listening on port 443. So now what I can do is I'm going to open up my browser, and I'm actually going to browse to my location. So right here, I'm actually going to go to https tcox2.mylabserver.com. Now, Firefox is going to give you an error message, as is Google or any browser worth its salt, because this is a self-signed certificate. So it will tell you you've asked to connect securely to tcox2.mylabserver.com, but can't confirm the connection is secure. All it's saying is that the certificate that is installed on the server is not signed by an independent certificate authority, so it can't make sure that the identity is verified. In this case, we installed the self-signed certificate, which is totally fine. So we can leave here, we can get the technical details. See, it uses an invalid security certificate because it is self-signed. We know we did it because we did it ourselves. The certificate is only valid for Linux Academy, which is the organization that we put in. If we click I understand the risks and hit add exception, we can view the certificate. So the certificate is saying that the common name is Linux Academy, which we put into the certificate when we generated it, which obviously doesn't match tcox.mylabserver.com. And even if we had matched it exactly, because it wasn't signed by a third party, a verifiable certificate authority, we would still get the error message because it wasn't signed by a verifiable third party certificate authority. It does tell us, and we can verify that it's our ticket, because not only does it say Linux Academy, but it begins on the 25th of August and ends on the 24th of August, 1 year later. And we know that we created this certificate with a 1-year expiration as well. So we can get information about the certificate, and most browsers will tell you everything from who it was issued by, etc. So it's Linux Academy. We know we put in New York, New York. Certificate subject ID, authority key identifier, all that kind of stuff. So once we confirm the security exception, we get the test website that does show a lock icon because we've added a security exception. And by adding the security exception, we've said it's okay to encrypt my traffic to this site using the certificate key that I indicated. We wouldn't have to do this. This would be green and a lock without a security exception for any site. And in fact, if we do, I believe Google by default does a certificate. You'll see we didn't have to import anything. And it says you're connected to google.com, verified by google.com, and the website connection is secure. And it's not that our connection isn't secure, it's just that it's not verifiable. But it does say that the connection is secure because we've added a security exception. So we've accepted the security of this site by importing that certificate when we added the exception. So for adding an SSL certificate to a running Apache instance within our vhost, that's all there is to it once you've generated the certificate. My name is Terry for Linux Academy.